Hi, welcome back. Today we are going to explore CSS Grid Layout. If you have ever wondered how to create complex layout with precision and flexibility, CSS Grid is your answer. In this video, we will break down everything you need to know about CSS Grid. And I am really looking forward to diving into CSS Grid with you. And I hope you are just as excited to start learning about it. CSS Grid is not just the most modern but also the most comprehensive way of creating layout. In fact, it's my opinion that it's also the simplest method, especially if you stick to the basics. You will be pleasantly surprised to know that setting up a basic grid structure takes less than a minute. So let's get started. First thing first, what exactly is CSS grid? Imagine a grid like a table divided into rows and columns. But it's not just any grid. It's a supercharged layout system built directly into CSS. A grid layout is a CSS technique that involves a parent element containing one or more child elements. This approach allows for the creation of flexible and responsive web designs, as the child element can be arranged in rows and columns within the parent container. By using a grid layout, we have more control over the positioning and alignment of content on our web pages. Now, creating a grid is straightforward. Like here in this example, we have this grid container, and in this grid container, we have 9 grid items. So to make a grid container, we just need to use display property, and then we need to set its value to grid like this. Similar to display flex, when you have a grid container, all of its child elements automatically become grid items. This means that you don't need to specify any special property for each individual item. They will naturally fall into the grid layout. Then we can define the structure of our grid, specifying the number of rows and columns using properties like grid template columns and grid template rows. Now we are going to create columns. To create column, we need to use the property grid template columns. Now here we need to specify our values. Like if we want 3 columns, we need to specify values like this. Now we have one column. To create second column, I am again using 200 pixels of width. And to create the third column, I am again using 200 pixels like this. And now you can see on our screen we have 3 columns and each column has a width of 200 pixels. So this value that we entered here is the width of our column. Now after creating our columns, we can also increase the height of these columns by using another property, which is grid template rows. And by using this property, we can increase the height of each column. Or we can also use this property to add rows in our grid container. Now similar to this grid template column property, first we need to specify the height, which is 100 pixels. Now you can see in our container the first row has height of 100 pixels. If we want to increase the height for this, we need to specify another value. Now our second row also have this height, and similarly if we want to increase the height of our third row, we can set it whatever value we like here I am setting 200 pixels. This is how we can change the height of our rows using this property. And we can also add another row by simply defining of our fourth row like this. Now you can see we have this space which is for our fourth row. Now this grid template column property plays a key role in defining the layout of columns in a grid. It allows us to specify both the number of columns and their individual width. The value is represented as separated list where each value corresponds to the width of a specific column in the grid. Like here, this width is for first column and this width is for second column and the last width is for our third column. On the other hand, this grid template row property is used to determine the height of each row within a CSS grid layout. It requires a space separated list as its values, with each value indicating the height of corresponding row in the layout. Now, what are grid rows and grid columns? In grid layout, column refer to vertical lines that define the placement of grid item. On the other hand, rows refer to horizontal lines that determine how items are positioned. Now in grid layout, we can also create gap using gap property just like we did in flexbox layout. Now to create gap between rows and columns, we just need to use gap property and then we can set its value to 1 rem like this. By doing this, we can create gap between rows and columns. Now the spaces between rows and columns are referred as gaps. To adjust the gap size between columns, we can use the column gap property. First we need to write column gap and then here we need to specify the value like 1 rem. And now you can see by using this column gap, we have only gap between our columns. And we also have a property which is row gap to give some space between these rows. Like we can use 2 rem. Now here we have 1 rem of gap between columns and we have 2 rem of gap between these rows. And shorthand property that I showed you earlier is simply the gap property. Now I am just removing this. Now if we want equal amount of gap between rows and columns, we can use this gap property just like this. After this, we have grid lines. In the context of columns, the lines separating them are referred to as column lines. Similarly, in terms of rows, the lines dividing them are known as row lines. Like in our example, these lines are called column lines and lines between rows are called row lines. Now just like Flexbox, here we also have a property to align our items horizontally in our grid container, and that property is justify content, and then here we can set its value to center if we want to center our items. Now you can see our items are now centered in our grid container. Now in order to check the behavior of each and every value of justify content property, it's better to use our developer tools. So we can check each and every value easily. Like here we are using center. Now here are all the values center and if we set it to end, and now our items are at the end of our grid container. If we set it to flex end, nothing is changing because we don't have any space at the end of our container. So flex end, flex start, inherit, initial, left, normal, right, space around to give space between our items just like we did in Flexbox, and then we have space between to give space between our items, and then we have space evenly, and after this we have start, stretch and unset. And now to align our item vertically center, we have another property which is align content property. Now to align our grid items vertically center, we need to use align content property. In Flexbox, we used align item properties to center our item vertically, but in grid container, we need to use this align content property. So this is the difference between aligning item vertically in Flexbox and grid container. Now here by using the center, you can see now our items are at the center of our grid container. And now that is it for today's video. In the next video, we will explore the properties that we can use on grid items. Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button to join this exciting web development journey with us. And if you have any questions or suggestions, you can put those in the comment section below. Until next time, keep coding and keep creating. I will see you in the next video.